Welcome to Chapter 8. This chapter we're going to discuss training human resources. By the end of the chapter, you should be able to define training and discuss why a strategic approach is important, explain the major categories of training, and describe instructional system design, identify 3 types of analyses used to determine training methods, or training needs, specify how to design a training program specifically for adult learners, explain the different means of internal and external training delivery, and you should be able to provide an example for each of the 4 levels of training evaluation. So what is training? Simply, it's a process where people acquire certain capabilities and skills to perform jobs. The strategy and training used within an organization looks at strategic training, how we invest in training, full cycle training from beginning of employment all the way through exit, right? You should constantly be training, and the investment that goes into that, the organizational competitiveness, and how competitive your organization is globally. Now, strategic training, it can add value that simply training cannot. So what this means is that it's not just the basic training. You have to be very strategic. It's long-term planning tied into the strategic plan and focus of the organization. Everything should run hand in hand. And as your goals adjust within the organization, so should your training. As the technology improves, so should your training. Strategic training can also help reduce the thinking that training alone can solve most problems. When you're fully invested in the organization and where it's going and where it needs to be, you understand that there are more mechanisms that are involved, more components that are involved in the process, and it's not simply just training someone how to do a job or how to perform a function, but it's deeper and broader. This can also help assess whether training can actually address specific issues and what else can be done. So when we look at training employees, um, it encompasses 31.5 hours per year and roughly $1,200 per employee, which is a 2% cost in payroll. It can help lower turnover, improve effectiveness and productivity, reduce cost, improve quality and customer service, and increase human capital. When we look at organizational competitiveness, if your employees are not continually trained, as I stated earlier, it's from the beginning through the end, they may fall behind and you can actually become less competitive. Why? You're not using new technology, new advancements, new processes, new way of seeing and responding to things. You're not adjusting to the marketplace. You're not adjusting to customer demand. So with that, you have to have knowledge management. And that's how you identify and leverage your knowledge to be more competitive, to have greater footing, greater market share. And it must be an integration of both performance and training in order for it to be effective. So sales training is key in many industries because many industries are selling some kind of product or service. And so being fully trained in that realm is very vital to the success of the organization. So figure A2 shows you the linkage between this. You have your organizational strategies, and those cycle into the outcomes that are needed to implement those strategies. And then you develop specific training activities. And depending on what your strategy is, you can see what the activity needs to be. We have our market competitiveness, and then we have to look at where we stand globally. And so you create assignment training so that those workers that you have overseas are able to be effectively trained to do their jobs no matter where they are, but also take into consideration that there's different variables and variances depending on what country or region that they're working in. So making sure that you're also training them on intercultural competence, and so that they are covering the basis of cognitive understanding, emotional, and behavioral, so that it is dealing with the internal and externals of not only the organization but also of the individual and their role not only within the company but interacting with your customer base, your vendors, but the stakeholders that are external to your organization, and understanding the climate that is involved. So when you have multinational operations, that means your company will be dealing with people from different cultures. And so they will be different than your own. And so you have to be mindful of that and look through their lens. Figure 8.3 shows you a visual of the components, the cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and the possible training that you could implement. So it could be a language course to cover the cognitive. It could be coaching on our prejudices, because we're all prejudiced in some way. It's being able to identify those and being able to address and how we're making sure that we don't push those prejudices in the workplace. And then behavioral, it could be that you provide a culture assimilator method, or you come up with different social skills training that focuses on different situations that are intercultural. So when we look at our training in human resources, there are some legal issues that are involved. Of course, you know about the EEO laws and OSHA training, but there's also contracts. There's some training that is only job related, and then there are the understanding that you have to select which individuals go into training, when they're in training, for how long, and what happens after that training. There are criteria and practices that you use to select individuals, and making sure that when someone is working overtime that they're properly compensated, and that contracts are always signed for training. There are the legally required training, which can include safety compliance, harassment prevention. There are basic and remedial skills that could be literacy, English language, core mathematics. There's job and technical training, which could be IT and technical. It could be customer service. There's the soft skills of ethics and interpersonal communication. Orientation is what most people engage in and they understand as far as training, and that's where you're introducing the new employee to their job, their coworkers, the organization as a whole. They're understanding the core values and the core makeup of the organization. There are certain key purposes that should be established and achieved, and that's making sure that there's always a favorable impression of the organization, that you're providing information about the job and the organization, that there is a enhanced interpersonal acceptance by coworkers, that you're accelerating the socialization and integration of that employee so that they are embedded within the corporate culture and they feel like they're part of the team, and that you're ensuring that their performance and their productivity begin more quickly, that you're helping fast track them. There are certain elements when you are effectively onboarding an employee, that there's established clear goals. They know, you know what they want. They start before day one on the job, right? It's not that is something that you're waiting till you're getting this done before they even start doing their work. You're providing multiple short sessions, creating connections and networks so they're able to come in, and it's not like the first day of school where they don't know anyone. You're actually kind of doing a before school starts, so they get to meet different classmates, so to speak, right? And then you're making it enjoyable. Don't make it so tightly wound that people are stressed. Orientation should be fun and engaging. It should never be a case of where people are already stressed before they get to even perform their work duties. So how do we go about evaluating? There's certain metrics that we can use. We can look at the tenure turnover rate. Those are people that have been well established within the organization and how quickly they have left the organization, you could look at the failure rate of new hires, how many people make it through the first 90 days or not. You can look at how many employees upgraded, as well as the development program participation. There's an ADDIE model that is assessment, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. And this is used as a systematic instructional design for making sure that your training covers these core areas. This ADDIE model is used in course room training as well. This class, for example. When we look at training needs assessment, there's effective efforts that are considered, like who needs to be trained, who will do the training, what form will the training take place. There's certain sources that we use. Grievances and accidents encompass organizational analysis. Job specifications can deal with job task analysis. Job knowledge tools can encompass individual analysis. When you establish training objectives and priorities, there is a gap analysis where you need to indicate the distance between current and desired employee capabilities. What types of training will meet those objectives, whether it's attitude, knowledge, or skill? Because there's always a gap between where they are and where you'd like them to be. The training design elements, we have a learner characteristic, so it could be self-efficacy. It could be that then translates over to the training transfer of possibility of, let's say, accountability or opportunity. Those both factor into our instructional strategies of practice and feedback, making sure that we're not having anyone as part of overlearning. And then, of course, there's reinforcement and immediate confirmation. So let's look at some of the learner characteristics. A person's ability to learn, their motivation to learn. Self-efficacy, as I mentioned earlier, is your belief that you can successfully learn the content that's being delivered. What's the perceived utility or value of what you're being taught, and what are your learning styles? So with the adult learner, there's ways in which we can engage an adult learner. There's ways in which we learn that's different than a younger person. They need to be self-directed. They need to know why they're learning something. They need to bring more work-related experience into the process. Are they motivated by both extrinsic and intrinsic factors? And then you have to be able to employ a problem-centered approach to learning. When we look at practice and feedback, practice is anytime you're able to perform a task or duty during training, and then you provide them feedback during and after training. Overlearning is when repeated practice, even after a learner has mastered the content. And copying someone else's behavior is what we call behavioral modeling. Error-based examples are when you share with learners what can go wrong when they don't use the proper training. Reinforcement is based on if you repeat responses that give someone a type of positive reward, but you avoid actions that are associated with negative consequences. Immediate confirmation is when people learn best if they receive reinforcement and feedback as soon as possible after training, not something that's delayed weeks or months, because at that point there's no recall as to what it was done right or wrong. Training transfer. When you transfer of training, this happens when you can actually use the job, use on the job what you've learned. So just like in this classroom, the ability for you to take what you learn and actually apply it in real time means there's a transfer of training. It helps you maintain use of the learned material over time. And to increase this transfer, you should be able to offer an overview of the content and process and how it's linked to the strategy of the organization, and ensure that it mirrors the job context. You have to be able to support new trainees to use their skills when they return to the job, and of course provide supervisor support and involvement in the training. Feedback is always needed from the supervisor as well. It's great if you can have feedback from coworkers and the opportunity to use the training. What is also very key is accountability. You expect that the new skills on the job are going to be applied, and you're going to hold them responsible for doing so. There's different delivery variables: subject matter, number of trainees, time allotted, completion time, geographic locations involved. When we look at figure 8.10, there's delivery options, right? Internal to the organization is if you do cross-training, on-the-job training. Something that's external would be providing a podcast or web conference or teleconferencing. when we look at informal training, this is when we have the interactions and feedbacks amongst the team. On the job training is most common because it's flexible and it's relevant. There are certain problems with it though, because it can disrupt regular work because you got to stop what you're doing in order to perform this training, and you can actually create or bad habits or share incorrect information with a trainee. There are the 4 steps on the job training. Prepare the trainees where you're going to put them at ease, find out what they know. Present the information so they know what's going to take place. Provide them with the practice. You can ask questions, observe and correct. Do follow up, right? You put the trainees on their own, check in frequently. Internal training is, as I mentioned earlier, the cross training, where you're training people to do more than one job. It increases flexibility and development. It also allows employees to be able to see the work that other people perform and see the value of those other people's role within the organization. There are some challenges because it's not favored by employees. It threatens unions with loss of job jurisdiction and broadening of jobs. And it does require scheduling work differently because it can cause temporary decrease in productivity. There are some advantages, as I've already mentioned, but some that I didn't mention are that it's less expensive to outsource training. It saves the organization the time of developing training. Your staff may lack expertise, and employees can interact with outsiders. Then, of course, you can see the other external training, outsourcing, government-supported job training, and educational assistance programs. There's a form of co-op training, which is school to work, apprentice training, as well as internships, and you can use any combination of these. E-learning is any time you're using web-based technology. That can be simulations, games. It could also be massive open enrollment online courses, distance training, and learning. M-learning is when you use mobile technology to conduct training using mobile apps. And blended learning is anytime you have interactive computer-based lessons, teleconferencing, and then you blend that in with traditional classroom instruction. Like this class, if this hybrid, then we're both on campus as well as online, or if it's a case where it's just online. So the blended is the hybrid format. There's pros and cons of using technology to support your training. A pro would be that is quick, appropriate feedback to learners. A con would be that it can cause training anxiety. It can also create security and access concerns. There are levels of evaluation. Reaction, learning, behaviors, results. Reaction is where you evaluate what is taking place by conducting interviews. Learning is measuring how well the trainers have learned facts and ideas, concepts. Behaviors is measuring the effect of how the training is and how that the training is impacting performance through observing that employee doing their work. And results is being able to measure how effective the training has helped achieve the objectives of the organization. We can look at some other metrics as far as the cost-benefit analysis, and that's where you compare cost and benefits associated with training, ROI analysis, and benchmarking. So the calculating training costs and benefits, you're determining cost, identifying any savings, computing those costs, and then you conduct a comparison of cost versus savings. When we look at possible costs and benefits, we have typical costs as well as benefits. What's typical is usually your trainer's salary and time, the trainee's salary and time, right? Those that are being trained, materials that are used, expenses being used, cost of the facilities and equipment, and if you lost any productivity, which would be considered your opportunity cost, the opportunity to be productive, to create something that can actually now translate into a sale. And then there's typical benefits, right? Of course, there's increase in production. You can reduce errors and accidents, reduce turnover. There's less supervision that's necessary, and you can use new capabilities, and your attitudes can change. Internal evaluations of training. Training evaluation designs you have post measure, pre and post measure, and then of course the pre-post measure using a control group. So there's 3 different areas in which that you can internally evaluate how effective the training is. So with that, that is the end of chapter 8. If you have any questions, please email me. Thank you.